Welcome to the Badaboom podcast. On this episode, Chris and I reflect over the Justice League Unlimited episode, Dark Heart, that showcases the Atom, Ray Palmer. We also talk about the character as a whole in the CW and the comics. Listen in to hear our thoughts. Hey, what's up, everyone?
Hey, what's up?
One of my favorite types of episodes we do, occasionally we'll look back at a show that we've enjoyed in the past. We've done one over some Batman Beyond and Justice League Unlimited. And today we are doing a Justice League Unlimited kind of character spotlight on the Atom.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it's all been Justice League Unlimited.
Yeah, actually, that's true. Yeah, we haven't actually done a Batman Beyond like from the series. It's the epilogue that they threw into the Justice League.
Yeah, and this episode, is Dark Heart from the season 1. It spotlights the Atom, and it's a great episode because it kind of highlights what's great about the Bruce Timm adaptations, just because it has so many characters. Yes, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern are at the forefront in a lot of ways, but you have someone like Ray Palmer, the Atom. You have some other reoccurring characters from the Justice League. You get to see Booster Gold, with the Black Adam movie coming out, Atom Smasher's there, Vigilante's there.
Yeah.
A lot of cool characters. You do see other at the end, the big wide shot of the team. You do see some other Justice Society members. That is pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of characters that they highlight in this, and this actually isn't the first time that they directly reference the Atom. They reference him in the just regular Justice League, the precursor to Justice League Unlimited, in the episode where Superman gets thrown forward in time. It's like Vandal Savage stole technology from Ray Palmer to destabilize gravity, and that's like the first time we kind of hear his name. So like when you hear it again in this one, if you've watched all the way through, oh wow, they also mentioned that he's in Boston. They get the same location and everything, and they have some really good continuity through those two shows for Ray Palmer.
Yeah, and Ray's a fun character in this because he's a professor. He's called upon, and what's interesting is that like the Justice League, which is cool during the show, it's like they always find a way to kind of have the original 7 kind of be at the point where they're like, oh my god, we can't win this, and then this character that maybe not as popular like Ray comes through and saves the day with their expertise.
Yeah, and throughout other animated shows like Young Justice, they continually highlight his power in like the kind of cheesiest of ways. Like in Young Justice, Captain Marvel kind of makes fun of him for, oh, all he can do is shrink. And Batman is like, yeah, it's how small he can get is what's so powerful about him. Because in this episode alone, just the fact that he can shrink down, shift between the different parts of the machines in order to get to the Dark Heart to destroy it. Like no one else there can do that. Not even Superman is powerful enough to destroy the machines or even get close to that aspect of the Dark Heart.
It's awesome too because the setup of it, you have these like nano machines that constantly duplicate and replicate every time they're destroyed.
They what? What do they do?
Duplicate and replicate.
They replicate? Yeah.
Yeah. And what's cool about it is that they're using all their powers. They're using a fist. They literally kind of drop a nuke on using the watchtower, which becomes, something later on.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to kind of like what the villains use against them. And then they're like, I guess the only thing we could really do is call the Atom. And then Ray comes in and he's kind of fascinated by the whole thing. And another thing that I really like about it is the way sort of the military is portrayed is very much like it feels like a throwback sci-fi movie where they have the big ass fucking radio phones, and then they have like the flamethrowers.
It takes place in the desert.
Takes place in the desert where no one could get hurt. And you have some like little jokes about when Batman is forced out of the Batwing. He's like, hey, can someone help me because I can't fly? Like literally I can't fly. It's just a great episode.
Yeah, and talking about the Atom in general, I think he's a really good contrast to his Marvel like equivalent of like Ant-Man, because at least what we've seen in MCU and some of the comics, if it's like Scott Lang, they're all about the jokes. They're kind of like, oh, I didn't think this would kind of happen. And Adam is Ray Palmer is all about like, oh, I need to figure this out. I need to understand this. I'm so amazed by how cool and how smart and like how well designed this is. And I just want to admire it. And even in the comics, if you've read like the Justice League of America line that came out a couple years ago, when the Atom shrieks down into his own universe and Ray Ray Palmer's protege, Ryan Cho, takes over, he's just like his mentor in the same way. And it's it's kind of refreshing because he's every team kind of needs a nerd, but he's not like the most nerdiest person still. Like they do a really cool job of balancing. Yeah, he's smart, but he's not like so overly smart that it's off-putting.
He's adventurous, and they show that in the beginning of the episode when they introduce him. He's working on a project where it's like it's not just him, looking at nanotechnology. He's actually like riding this nanite kind of like snake where he's like trying to kill it, and it embodies where that character comes from. A lot of his Silver Age stories was about these bite-sized adventures, and it captures that in just that little bit you get in the beginning.
Yeah. So I know we got to see a little bit of Ryan Cho in Zack Snyder's Justice League Unlimited, and especially not his Justice League Unlimited, and Zack Snyder's Justice League Snyder Cut. We saw a lot more, and we see like at the very end where like he gets his own department of like nanotechnology, and I thought that was a really cool way of trying to bring the Atom in. Very subtle, but very cool because the Atom doesn't necessarily play very big roles, or you wouldn't really see him stacked up against like, oh yeah, we saw the Atom in a Justice League movie. Like that's like, I wouldn't have thought about that at all. But it's interesting to see how they're trying to, or how potentially they will involve the Atom in more parts of the DCEU, because like I also haven't seen him in like any animated movies recently, like in the last couple of years. Like I think Young Justice is like the last like animated place we really see him.
Yep. But don't forget, he was the star of Legends of Tomorrow. So, he
Yeah.
had a pretty big presence on, the CW shows. I do like the way he was portrayed by, Brandon Ralph. Obviously, they kind of went more of like the billionaire kind of like not necessarily a playboy, but hey, I'm rich and also smart and I developed this technology and stuff like that. But it was cool, and you did get a bit of that adventure side of him on that show, which was cool.
Yeah, they did. That was like an interesting take. I don't give much credit to some CW stuff because I feel like they're always like, we have the characters we can work with. How do we make them look like the characters we want them to be? So like they can't use Batman. Okay, we're gonna make Green Arrow be kind of like Batman. And while they add him, I don't really think too much of a character that they were trying to maybe have him replace. It did give off a lot of like Tony Stark kind of vibes with just kind of like his carefree attitude, but at the same time, it's also like before his suit could shrink, he was out here flying around. So it was just like, all right, like you're just using the name so you can have technology, but not like really be like, I have this power. Like, it would have been, it's an action show. So you can't really be like, oh, yeah, we just see him occasionally in the lab and whatnot. It's not like you can kind of like get by with that like in an animated show. And even in animated shows, you would have thrown him into like shrinking sooner than you would have in like a live action show. So
Man, a lot of that probably had to do with the budget.
yeah, and CW was working with what they had and really using the name for creating those connections and whatnot. So, they were working with what they got.
For sure.
Yeah. But what do you want to see the Atom pop up next, man? I mean, he could literally pop up anywhere.
I'd like to read more Adam comics, not yeah, I haven't seen him too much in the comics, and I do like when he pops up. Like I really liked him in when he appeared in Vendetti's Hawkman run, especially with his history with Hawkman and the Silver Age. And I think it's a really good place to kind of experiment and grow the character, because in terms of like live action and animated, I don't see where the Atom fits, just because there's so many other characters in front of him in terms of like what I would want to see, and where DC and Warner Brothers Discovery's focus is.
Yeah, it's tough to kind of see where he'll fall in. He's one of those potential like main characters, but not like, hey, we're gonna have 3 movies about you main characters. Just like, hey, we have this one movie. I mean, I don't think anybody was really like, hey, we're gonna have 3 Ant-Man movies either. So
No, and it took them a while to get to Ant-Man. I think at that point they had done, what was
it
it?
came out like right after Age of Ultron.
Yeah, it was almost like 8 years of MCU movies before they got to Ant-Man.
Yeah. So, and like, I'm sure it would be a good idea to probably develop a lot more foundational DC content for movies and TV shows that are live action before bringing them in. But
And also Ant-Man, not, the Scott Lang version, but, Hank Pym was, kind of like a founding member and one of the original Avengers members. So it kind of made sense that it was like, oh, like eventually it'll bring, like the Atom is like way, 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 way down the line. And even in a Justice League context, the context we're talking about it in Unlimited, they had to make Justice League Unlimited, where they basically put every character in the DC universe in that show.
yeah. And, even if you were to try and like, have Hank Pym, Scott Lang, Ray Palmer, and Ryan Choi, like that kind of like dynamic happen. Like, nah, I don't feel like Ryan Choi is like the most popular, or even he's not even that well known of a name or a character, because he doesn't even necessarily get called the Atom for quite a while. He's just Ryan Choi, the assistant to Ray Palmer in most comics in most cases. So it's tough to, I think, find a spot where they're going to fit well, which was why I think it was so surprising when he showed up in Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League, because not a character you imagine you'd like kind of just see. I thought I would see Steel around Silas Stone more than we would see Ryan Choi or Ray Palmer.
Yeah, I think it's just an attempt to kind of make the character more interesting, because obviously the Ray Palmer version was in the CW shows, and Ryan kind of presents an opportunity to kind of be like, hey, like let's highlight a different type of Atom, because there is an Ant-Man, there is an Iron Man. So how do we make this character a little bit different? Obviously has a similar power set to a very popular Marvel character. So like I think it was just a way to kind of like, hey, like one, the Atom's not that popular, so how do we get the Atom in? And then two, how do we make it more interesting? And I think that's what they did. But watching this episode, you find that like, hey, if you go to the core of the character, where he's having adventures and in a tiny universe, and he while he's doing that, he's also learning, which is really exciting. He almost looks at these adventures as research. So like, what was cool about this episode is like, while he's trying to destroy this thing, he's fascinated and he's learning. He's like, oh my god, like it's adapting. It's almost built like a living organism. It's like he even thinks like, oh my god, like I can't destroy the heart, but I can give it a heart attack. So that is something, if they were to bring him into the fold, whether it be an animation or a live action setting, they really need to focus on that.
Yeah, and like there's plenty of people out there that you don't think of like when they're acting. You think, oh, maybe they're a little bit distracted and they're not necessarily like a part of the big picture. I kind of think a little bit of Ezra Miller's Flash in Justice League, like where he's like, oh, that's your Batman signal, that's yours. Like he's not really like paying attention to what's going on, but that's kind of how the Atom is. But he's not paying attention because he's so fascinated about what he's seeing and what he's learning. He's not like just like absent minded. So like pulling someone in that's going to be able to kind of portray that very well would be really cool for a live action Atom. And like you mentioned, like being able to shrink down and go into like your own universe. Like in some of the JLA comics, like it's crazy because they don't necessarily touch on you can travel to different universes or travel back in time by like shrinking down like they do in Avengers, but they get like this close to saying it, and that could have been like a cool way that maybe they were going to try and add that into like live action potentially in the future for Zack Snyder stuff. But we'll never know. But like the fact that the atom is there, you're like, oh, maybe this is how they will change things. But
Yeah, I think they were focused on using the Flashpoint and evil Superman to talk about the future in those movies.
yeah. But we've always got the Justice League Unlimited for all the great stories of our youth. And I'm very happy that we got this one for the Atom because it is one that highlights a character that isn't as well known, but most of the times the most unwell known characters tend to have some of the greater stories.
No, and we talked about it when we talked about the Booster Gold episode.
Absolutely.
These are great ways, put a spotlight to these characters you may have not known, especially as a kid. For me, I didn't read the comics, so the comics really were these shows. And this is how I was introduced to a lot of concepts and characters of the DC universe. And I love it.
Yeah, man. Can't wait to hopefully find more of these stories that highlight some of these lesser known heroes and hopefully then be able to dive into some of their comics someday.
Yeah. Bada boom.
Bada boom. Thank you for listening to the Badaboom podcast. Keep the conversation going with Chris and I on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You can find us on all these places at Badaboom Podcast. Get into the comments on our YouTube channel. Let us know what you like about the show or what you'd like to hear from us in the future. Until next time, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thanks for listening.